Hello and most welcome to 1116 of the Heidegger series. We are having a really sunny and warm day here. It's just spliffing fantastic. Nobody can complain. I will today talk about a rather interesting discovery I've had, and it's very unexpected as well. I used to be very particular with what text I read, and this one is not part of what I usually read. I thought it was an acclaimed researcher or a scientist of some sort, but it turned out to be nothing of the kind. I will put a link with the text, but first listen to this. 116. How fractals show that there are possibilities for greater knowing, more encompassing and more telling. The first comparison we had in the previous lecture, and it regarded how differences in curves could be likened and compared directly, and the curves and diagrams and scales I'm talking about are the ones that comes when you do a calculation. You get different shapes and forms, and the knowledge that we could compare the shapes directly without looking at the figures, and we can even go into small details of the shapes and still get valuable and interesting information. It's so new that I think very few do understand this, and it has to do with the so-called Mandelbrots set. The Mandelbrots set is in a way scaleless, and we've spoken before about scale relativity and scalelessness. But this is scalelessness on a completely different scale, pun intended. This different scale has to do with how we arrange mathematics, how we put things into comparison with each other, how we do stochastic research, and then in the actual presentation. The idea of scale creates a knowledge that seems to go further and further and further away, and it becomes harder and harder to reach into the knowledge. And the Mandelbrot set completely negates that. This is scalelessness when it comes to the area of knowledge, as showing that we can reach directly into knowing, and we don't, in some cases, even have to understand what the figures are supposed to represent. So these oddities are coming from, they're no older than the 60s when Benoit Mandelbrot made his discovery, but I would say that they are younger than that, newer than that, because it took a lot of research. There are in the United States 40,000 people doing Gauss calculations and research within the area, so we are very far from to have covered the area completely. There are a lot more land to claim, so to speak, but one of the things that we already claimed is that direct comparison is possible, and this is also a piece of knowledge that comes from Feigenbaum's constant. Feigenbaum's constant is scale independent in the situ of knowledge, We spoke in the lecture 1115 about logi, or how things are situated in different logi, which is the plural of logos, and that could give an idea that there are distance between the different logis. That was not the purpose, it was just the opposite. But I think this idea that knowledge somehow is distance and you can't reach into it, and the current idea that experts rule the world and we can never delve into this. Well, take the observer into the equation and all of a sudden we can once more reclaim knowledge. We can also, of course, which we previously mentioned many times, we can reclaim space and we can reclaim time. But in this particular case, I would speak more about knowledge. One could say that knowledge had a communal or joint origin. This is the etymological way of going about the things, or Geschichte-like if you want to use a Heideggerian term. And in the Geschichte-like, what we do is we go all the way back from the beginning, and here we had good help of Barbara Tversky that show that the first steps into abstraction, leaving the actual situation with a very limited amount of knowledge that is in that situation. We can, for instance, think about a person that hunts. He goes on his hunts and he delivers, he catches prey, but that person is very limited in his doings. There is not much knowledge going about. At some time in the development, carvings started to be made within caves. Those became very exact, very beautiful. Even to these days, you can observe them. I can recommend, if you get the chance, to go to the Lavasco caves, have a look-see. They are absolutely stunning. And one can also see that some caveman, maybe the painter himself, choose to sort of take out the buffaloes from a depiction and put it elsewhere, outside of the original picture. Barbara Tversky calls that decontextualization. All of a sudden, knowledge can now be changed by decontextualization of the bisons or the buffaloes. They can have a position by themselves. They can become one object or a group, and they can also be, as Barbara Tversky called, recontextualized, and that means that they can be put into another context. For instance, you can put the cattle next to some other prey, for instance deer, venison, hare, and make a sort of plan of what you're going to hunt. You can also decontextualize the hunter, take him out, and as you can see, this could be the very first step towards being able to count. Count is something that we do, but it needs decontextualization and recontextualization. This is how it began. This understanding was later furthered by Lakoff Johnson. They showed that all the very abstract things are coming from interactions or doings. As you can see in the first example, the caveman was doing the depiction. Decontextualization and recontextualizations are both things that you do, processes, actions. Even though for us they often seem to be static things, knowledge has become static, limited, they are from the very outset processes. And it makes it possible for the caveman all of a sudden to do things he was not able to do before. He can plan his catch. Of course, at the very beginning, in the first couple of centuries after the discovery of decontextualization and recontextualization, the changes will be very small, and then they progress, and somewhere in that development counting came about. Lakoff-Johnson showed that height from a human being later came to be used as transferred, decontextualized, and to become quantity. And this is so simple, so incredibly obvious, but it has eluded man until Lakoff-Johnson. You just pile things on top of each other, you get some height, and then you make a transference, and you say that higher is increasing quantity, lowering is decreasing quantity, and all of a sudden you made a very interesting shift. You made a decontextualization of height, taking your own height as a comparison, and all of a sudden you constructed something completely new. None of the primitives in the Amazon basin or in the desert of the Mojave in Atamacan Desert or Mexico or the Namibia Kalahari Desert, none of these are aware of this. They never made this step in the development. This is a very good pointer to knowledge is expanding, and knowledge needs to be seen as a thing of its own, not something deduced from space and time, not something that we discover. Knowledge has its own history, seine eigene Geschichte, as Heidegger would have said. Lakoff-Johnson shows that mathematics comes from doings, it comes from the body, and for me that was a revelation, and it was furthered by Barbara Tversky. Of course, we were in contact with Barbara Tversky, but I would like to say that now when I look at the Mandelbrots set once more, here is a depiction and understanding coming from fractal geometry, that they all stemming, so to speak, from a higher, more original form, and that in the very development we lost the sense that they are coming from an origin beyond, and we get stuck in the contradictions of knowledge. Therefore we don't know or don't understand, or are no longer able to fathom that there is common origin. And that common origin is not something we can talk about directly, but it can be shown in different ways, and one of those is most magnificently the Mandelbrot set. We see here Mandelbrot set comes from an equation that takes fractality. Fractality is of reality. This is what space is. So Mandelbrot approximately did the same thing as the whole development of humankind, and put us in a position where we no longer understood that we can reach into knowledge directly using shape, relation and processes, and we come to this stalemate. And I think this is one of the reasons it struck me as so fantastic when I started to understand it. The Mandelbrot set and its possibility of depicting. The Mandelbrot set can depict all that is within the set, but at the same time there is a depiction calculation of the outside, and this simultaneity in the very cusp, or so to speak, the beach line. We spoke about Norway before, but in the beach line, therein lies the movement, the interesting thing, the thing that gives the information. And it's very hard to say what is inside and outside there. Actually, in some ways they amount to something that is the same. I think it would be better here at this instance to call that complementarity. Think about the complexion of the Norwegian coast, but that complexion is also what creates the fjords, the water, the sea. And think about this, that the creative power is in the very delineating line. This is where everything is happening, and we haven't looked at that before. And this, I would say, that line, that beach line, or whatever you call it, this is what takes us back to the origin, from where it all stemmed in the beginning. And this was further helped for me by this wondrous book. I don't have the name right here, I'll put it into the description. And oddly enough, this is the first book I read that it is not by an acclaimed scholar or a very, very well-educated person. Still, the pages, it's very high quality. I'm so glad I made a mistake this time. I didn't check it out, and thanks to that I start reading it. You could call it someone with very good intuitions. And of course, sometimes it could be the case that you need good intuition instead of being scholared. Because to understand the communal origin, you need to be outside civilization completely. It wouldn't even do with the Bushman who had some contact with civilization. You need to be completely outside of the development of knowledge. Some unknown tribe may be in the Amazon basin, but to do these things you at the very same time have to be highly educated to come to a conclusion, having the tools to think, because the person in the Amazon basin wouldn't have those tools. So that's an impossibility in itself, and this is further proof why all these time were absolutely necessary to come to these conclusions. And I would say I now realize Lakoff Johnson, absolutely super important. Without their help we wouldn't have come so far. But in the end, I think these people are going to be surpassed with even greater understanding. And somewhere in this development we can sort of cast away the helping tools. But this is a unique project. The H series is striving to find ways to understand something that never have been understood, and that's quantum mechanics. So unusual measures are called for. We can't do it the conventional way, and we can't use the limited conventional knowledge. And I say it's completely fair to say that there should be knowledge that could act as tools as to transfer the discoveries of quantum mechanics to the common layman. But still we're not there, and therefore we need to strive beyond the reaches of educational system, and we also need to use our own creativity. But this was great. It wasn't really creativity, it was more of a mistake. But hey, most scientific discoveries were made by mistake. Take Alexander Fleming's discovery of the penicillin. It was because he forgot his lunch soup. And during the weekend, when he left the lunch soup, it started to mold and it affected the test and killed off bacteria. And when I think about the Mandelbrots set, think also that we start often to depict each other. We are both fractality, and the coastline is the meeting point between two human beings. And therefore automatically human beings depict each other. Just like the fjord is a depiction both of the coastline and the water at the same time. I know we usually ignore the water, but the water gets created simultaneously. The same goes with human beings. We can say that human beings are Julia sets. And this makes it possible for me to understand the concept of niyama. And I think that goes back at least 800 lectures. I won't even ask you to go back in the series. But niyama is a necessary step in the ladder that is Ashtanga, the 8 steps of getting to perfection of yoga. And it's one of the first steps. Yama niyama are necessary to develop flexibility, coordination. And this is because when we start to treat other people in a more delicate, more fractal way, and understand that to some extent it is complementarity, we are not individuals, and in other sense we are complete individuals, and we need them both. We need to be collective to be individual, and we need to be individual to be collective. And so many other things that I mentioned before, especially coming from the voice of the friend. Both things are necessary at the very same time to make it possible to strive into those things. I now understand how we can reach niyama, and how interacting with other people in a softer, more delicate way, and also having a reciprocal soft way from the other persons, that will in the end make you more soft, more coordinated, more how can you say, more accurate, more precise in your movement, more aware in your movement. We are, all we people, we are like the fjord. We are both of the same thing. And understanding that, we also understand what makes us individual. So group mentality and being individual goes hand in hand. But it has to be in a conscious, clear way. I will have to continue after my visit to the nurse. I say thank you very much and have a pleasant afternoon.